Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar and this session of Ipsos Insights. With me today, I hope I have Alison, Chaltas, our president of Shopper, situated in the United States. So thank you very much for joining this as well, Alison. So today, me and Alison will take you through a bit of thoughts and point of views on the new omnichannel universe that we are in this e-commerce area and what it means for the overall strategy of businesses. So that's going to be the purpose of today. We will start with a little bit of like overall generic stuff around what's happening in the markets in the world around e-commerce and omnichannel and e-commerce, and then me and Alison will take you through a few cases and try to be a little bit more tangible on how other businesses are tackling these challenges in omnichannel universe and how they deal with e-commerce and so forth in this new universe. So without further ado, let's move into to the presentation. And let me just say, like, you can ask questions, and we have June sitting in the background gathering all the questions, and then in the end June will ask some of the questions, if any, and then we'll take it from there. We are roughly 45 minutes of a session, so it's not that long. So we know all that e-commerce is growing quite a lot, and since 2019 it's grown by 9% when we're looking at 2023, and this year it's somewhere in between. I think it's 19 or something. So we know it's a business that's really growing now and in the coming years, which just emphasize why we're all here today. So during COVID, around 31% report that their primary channel is now online, and that's quite a large share if you think about it, going from a much larger share of brick and mortar. Still, needless to say, brick and mortar is the largest share, but that's quite a lot of people using it as primary. And furthermore, there are of course more people that use it as their secondary or tertiary channel. So if we're looking across all the markets, if we're looking across all the different categories, we see that there are some variations across categories. So we see that, for instance, among toys and games and home electronics, clothes, jewelry, we see a larger share of online only, and we also see a larger shares of both in-store and online. And that's as expected, but maybe more interesting is the difference across countries. So when we look at the global average on the far left side, we see roughly 31% that are using, as I mentioned before, online as their primary channel, and then we have a great variation between countries. In Russia, we see in these markets the smallest share of online buyers, whereas in China we have actually moved across the 50%. So there's more online shopping behavior in China, India, South Korea than there is offline. So the largest share is using e-commerce as their primary channel, and that's quite interesting, and we see a lot of movement towards that, and that was really spiked by the COVID situation. Another interesting fact is that if we're looking at two of the markets that are in the different spectrum of the previous chart, Australia had a much lower share than China in terms of primary users of e-commerce, whereas China had the 62, Australia had 21. Comparing these two countries with very different shares of primary users online would lead one to think that that's primarily due to COVID. But when you're looking at we have a survey where we are measuring all the time where in the COVID stage we think the people think they are. So as we see here, Australia and China are very similar in the curve in how far they are in the process. So China have a really good hold of the disease, and so does Australia. So the majority of people are moving towards the end of the pandemic to a new normal or even post-pandemic. So despite having very similar curves, there we saw on the previous slide there is a vast difference in the e-commerce share. That's just to say that yes, COVID spiked and pushed and ignited the e-commerce shopping, but it's been a path and a journey we've seen for a long time, and it's not the sole driver of this omnichannel change. If we take a little bit back into Denmark, we have a ongoing study where we track the different categories and how many people are buying these categories online versus offline, and what they spend and how much, which brands they buy. And underneath of each categories, we also have sub products. So we see a great variation again in terms of the categories where they're being bought. Where we see tobacco, household goods, and groceries are still the smallest in Denmark, despite the success of namely during the pandemic and all the other retailers that came out and did pick-up solutions and so forth. Groceries is still very small share that's being purchased online, roughly 7%. Whereas if we go to the top, we see that clothes and shoes especially taken off as some of the bigger categories. Books, movies, and music is a little bit complex because that's also online newspaper subscriptions and subscription to, for instance, Spotify. So that's very obvious that's driven by that. So it's not so much physical books being bought or LPs, but more subscriptions and ebooks. So there is a great variation of categories, but all in all, we see an increase in all these categories. So there are especially 4 categories that in the past just 3 months in Denmark has experienced a growth, and that's especially kitchen appliances. So everything that goes into the kitchen has increased, and that's everything from a whisker to a blender to whatever you put in a kitchen has really grown during the past 3 months in online purchases. We also see tools, building supplies, etc., growing, and that's especially due to the increase in good weather, the fact that people have been stuck at home and had a lot of do-it-yourself projects. They've renovated their houses and so forth. So when the good weather came in Q2, we saw a large increase in these products. And actually, we also saw a decrease, not online, but just in electronics, consumer electronics, where people rather would stay outside and build stuff than sitting with their tablets inside. In Denmark, in particular, the food, meal, vegetable boxes has really taken off as well. They've been here for many years, but they have come into there's come a lot of new providers, and we see a growth in this also in the busy day at work. It's a nice thing to have the food boxes delivered, and especially the boxes with a recipe and where you basically have a meal are increasingly popular. And then also a larger increase in the past month in terms of bikes and running gear. Not surprisingly, as well as the weather increase in Denmark, more and more people turn to outdoor activities, but the difference being that's not a new thing, but the new thing is that more and more of this stuff is being purchased online than we actually saw before. So there is potential in e-commerce. E-commerce is growing, but there's for sure still some issues with this new channel. And when we ask globally, there is a roughly 70% that thinks there are some critical issues with shopping online. And if we look more into that, the delivery delays are the biggest issue or error when purchasing online. So there is still a room for how to optimize the delivery, both in terms of delays, but also in terms of the 5th point about the tracking that wasn't really accurate. Other than that, it's the system of the e-commerce or the retailer not being up to date or good enough so that it cannot keep track of what is actually in stock versus what is shown to the customer on the website. And then thirdly, when you buy a product, you automatically, at least for most sites, sign up to emails and information and content from the seller, and that's the third largest bug for people buying online. So basically, there's a whole range of barriers for shopping online. There is a range of things that needs to be optimized for this to work. But if we pause for a second on the e-commerce, there has also been a huge increase in what we refer to as voice commerce. So most people, or at least a lot of people, have been to a home where there is a speaker like Alexa or something else where you can speak to the speaker and it can tell you the weather and so forth. And in many countries, it's the usability of these speakers, our voice assistants, have increased dramatically, and they are now able to purchase things for you. So you can speak to the Alexa and say that you need more dishwashing soap, and it will automatically buy that brand you normally buy, and you'll get it delivered through Amazon. So there are some really cool, effective features of voice commerce that helps the shopping experience being very seamlessly. And then we are back to how you then get the products. But the whole buying process of going in and experiencing the challenges around the buying process is then being eliminated by simply asking what you want from the speaker. So we are at Ipsos having a lot of international and large clients, and we today, me and Alison, included a few quotes that we think are quite interesting. This one is from Connie at Unilever, which is basically saying that the era of looking at brick and mortar as your channel and the e-commerce as a short-term or an additional channel for your sales is not really a thing anymore. You need to think about how Unilever needs to think about how their products get from the production facility all the way to the end user, and that goes also for online purchases. And that's really important for them to think about how they build their entire content strategy, their media strategy, the analytics, the supply chain, and the communications. And a lot of that will come back to actually in some of the cases where we've developed 4 pillars that are really important when you build your omnichannel strategy. We also have Doug from Walmart in the US, and as a retailer and not so much as a production brand or conglomerate of a lot of brands, they are trying to merge the more traditional brick and mortar channels with online channels and ensuring that the shopping experience, maybe even with e-commerce, is as seamless as possible for the buyer. So they're working at how to expand the service they deliver, and they continue to build in their e-commerce business and linking the two businesses together. Finally, there's also a large trend, especially in Asia, with video, where a lot of different platforms are used to use video to actually buy and sell products. So that's nowadays a lot of stuff can be bought, and Instagram has turned into a social media into an actually channel as well. And having the video live where a person is showing off products and you can buy them directly in that platform is really going to take off in Asia, and already is a large thing among the younger generation. And that goes for a vast majority of products. And it's like, especially under COVID, you have been able to be with a product and a person going through the product and presenting the product's features for you in real time. You to ask questions is the closest you can get to being there in basically in real life. So that's really something to look out for as well in the coming years and months. With all these techs, it's also important always to remember that behind every tech, behind every solution, behind every click on with the mouse, there's a person. And it's all about understanding how the person and the human experience the shopping behavior. So just as if you want to create a nice environment in the brick and mortar, in the stores, you also need to create a seamless and a nice experience when people are shopping online. And it's just very important thing to highlight that tech alone doesn't do it. You need to think about what are the needs and motivations, barriers and drivers of the people buying your products online as well. So I'll stop talking and hand over the word to Alison for a few minutes as well. Are you there, Alison? I think you're muted.
Thank you so much. The system had me locked. They were afraid I was going to jump in and interrupt. So thank you, Anders, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I do wish we were together in Copenhagen. It's a beautiful time of year, but this is the best we'll do. Next year, we'll be in person somewhere, right? So I want to build upon all of the background and the stage that Anders just set and talk about what do we do and what do we do as brands and retailers, marketers and market researchers in this world. And we've spent a lot of time as a company over the last year thinking about what's omnichannel going to look like post-pandemic, and what are the things that we believe are going to stick, and what are the methodologies and approaches that we need to provide to our clients to make sure we're bringing that human dimension that Anders just mentioned. There's an awful lot of big data out there. There's an awful lot of guessing on what's going to stay, but there's some things that we know. One is that big data alone is not going to get you there, that you need the human touch, and that's our mission, to bring that human perspective that goes along with the big data. And then the second is, regardless of your category development, whether you're the athletic apparel or technologies that are at the high end of e-commerce, or whether you're a fresh foods business that's just getting started, shopper behavior changed dramatically during the pandemic, and some of that will stick. And so we have to get ready. There's three things we talk about as critically important. The first is start thinking about consistency. How do you deliver consistency across digital and physical touch points and all dimensions of what you're trying to do? It's hard because in many companies, up until right now, e-commerce has almost been a separate division or separate team from the people who operated in the brick and mortar world. And the winners are bringing that all together. The second, and this is that human touch, what we want to help you and be your voice and eyes and ears on how do you walk beside consumers in their journey. Consumers are still learning how to use technology, or most of us are still learning how to use technology. And now we're learning what we like and what we did during the pandemic, what parts of that we want to use forever. And so we have solutions that are all about how do we walk beside those consumers to optimize the human experience and the people side of things. And yes, there's a lot of operations and technology behind that to make sure your orders are on time and your pricing's right, and you're fixing the dissatisfiers and are shared. But really the human experience is at the core of that. And then the last is understanding not just the category, but the role of your particular brand in fulfilling that experience. So let's go a little deeper in what that means. And the next page talks to a framework that we provide our clients to think about 4 different steps of getting started, and getting started fast. You know, it's learning from best practices around the world. About 40% of our business in shopper research is in the technology space, and we've learned a lot, and we're bringing that to categories that were not typically thought of high tech. And we see a 4-step process for best practices that doesn't have to be linear. It's best to start by diagnosing the situation and really taking a step back and thinking holistically about the role of your category and brand in omnichannel, and the role of omnichannel in your category and brand. And then innovate in a way that is omnichannel driven, not just innovate the way we used to, you have better flavors, maybe a little healthier, a little better for the environment, but really think about it from a shopping standpoint in a digital world. Communicate, that's the seamless experience. How do we communicate? It doesn't have to be the same images or the same words, but it has to be the consistent message. And then lastly, activation, in-store, online, along the way, on a laptop, on a phone, on a voice box, all of them tied together. So let's dig a little bit into the diagnose piece of work. And what we're going to do now is Anders and I are going to go back and forth and talk about each step and share a case study. So in diagnose, it's what is, whoops, not yet. It's what is the role, and answering some key questions. How will the experience evolve in my sector, in my line of business? Making sure you understand the total holistic shopper journey, not just e-commerce, not just in-store, but how the whole thing comes together. How will the experience evolve? What customer needs, motivations, and touch points matter most along that journey? There are different needs for 2022 than there were in 2019. We've all changed and we're all thinking differently. And so any great path to purchase work you did in 2019 or earlier is probably not going to be as accurate as you want it to be, and it's not going to be indicative of the new digital shopper for 2022 and beyond. And how does your brand deliver consistent experiences across that? So let me take you into a case study, and this one is about mapping the omnichannel journey to drive conversion, and a brand and a manufacturer is working together. So on the next page, we have the approach. And what we did, and if you think about the business issue here, we've got categories where new habits are forming, new shopping habits, new consumption habits, a lot more at home, a lot less out, a lot more outdoors, a lot more online. And so this client wanted to understand the omni shopping motivations that are driving different journeys. They wanted to understand the trigger points that drive day-to-day consideration, both in terms of consumption and purchase, and how they work together. So it's not just shopper anymore, it's kind of consumer and shopper in one integrated journey where they go in and out. A human goes in and out of buying and consuming and back and forth with their phone by their side, right? How do those different mindsets shape the journeys? How do they change? What's the online decision hierarchy? We used to talk about decision trees or purchase decision hierarchies. Well, we know, we've seen the facts, they're different online than they are in store, and it's important to understand those differences and how they connect. Barriers, loyalty, all of the things that you would want to know, but from an omni-channel view. And so on the next slide, we have the approach. And we used a model that we talk about as understanding the life path. And we started by really listening to consumers, and our behavioral scientists evaluated what they said and really got into what's happening in the company and then what's happening with their shoppers. We then did an online interview, which sounds simple, but we wove in some very, very advanced analytics on touch point modeling to understand what touch points really matter. And at the same time, we updated and did an online shopper decision tree using our Sim Store virtual shelf technology. And what that can do is we can create a physical store shelf and a website, which I'd like to talk about as a digital shelf, in parallel, and have shoppers go through both. And we start to understand the differences in the decision tree. We also weave in as much as we can a lot of the trackers, such as the one Anders just shared for Denmark, the e-tracker, where we are tracking behavior in different countries around the world. We then followed people and we did webcam interviews while they shop. And we can do this a lot of different ways. We have some new technologies, even more recent than this, which was 6 months ago, where we can have shoppers download an app and it actually tracks their shopping behavior on their phone. So we can see it, we can visualize it, and then they can talk over it, and we can prompt them to say, you know, verbalize your journey, take us through it, and transcribe that into text. And it's a very valuable way to get some deep perspective on what shoppers are actually doing that complements the survey. And then a lot of work on activation, not just reports, but also workshops to make sure we have the proper guidance. And I just want to give you a quick tease on some of the impact. We like quotes, and you can read one here about, I'm very happy with the influence of the work. And I think that's really important. Cross-functional influence is critical in omnichannel. Some of the key learnings matter. We need to simplify, we need to be more sensory, we need to disrupt that stock-up trip. You know, we're not talking about this particular part in detail, but in all routinely purchased categories, auto purchase and auto replenishment is the name of the game. And so in many countries, for example, in pet food, people are buying 100% of their pet care products online. And Amazon and the others all have ways that I happen to be pet crazy and have a dog and 2 cats, and we measure what they eat. So we know exactly how much food they need every 6 weeks. And the boxes come on that day, and it just keeps coming, and we never change brands and we never change retailers, and it's just always there, and it's really beautiful. So that's what we talk about by disruption. How do you get in there and stick? And then improve your credibility with retailers so that retailers and manufacturers are doing joint business planning together online, the way we've done for many, many years in physical stores. So all different things that this client asked us to look at to diagnose the situation. Anders, you want to talk about innovate for a minute?
Yeah. So basically, when you've diagnosed all the issues and all the market and the challenges you have, you need to innovate against that. You need to innovate and figure out how to optimize the new products. And as Alison said before, it's not only about the pack and labels and so forth for the physical stores, but you need to innovate and make sure you have product that works in the online environment as well. So the formats, the primary packaging, the secondary packaging is also becoming important when you are, for instance, getting products delivered. So there's a lot of innovations and also around like evaluate and maybe also optimize the service and the digital journey around buying the products online. So as a second pillar, we'll take you through a case study where we are trying to for a client keep their digital customers, and basically it's a home fixtures and hardware stuff for your kitchen. They have been in a brick and mortar business for many years, and they a few years ago launched a website and came online. And then in 2019 they also launched a kitchen design tool direct to consumer through their eCommerce channel, and it's not really been doing quite well. And I think the quote in the upper left corner says it pretty well. It's about making this journey intuitive and making sure it works. And if we look at the first donut chart, we see that 63% end up not buying anything. So why is that? And that's the kind of the challenge that the company faced. Like, we need to figure out why 2/3 roughly leave our site either with something in the basket or not buying it, or leave it through before even getting anything into the basket. And there are some things around that indicated that they were not confident without buying this without the expert help. So measuring and stuff like that is something that was a barrier for them. And then there was a share that also was considering and not confident in the quality, cost, etc. But what we did was a combination of what we refer to as innovation and UX. And UX is the whole user experience of the online. So the whole product that the company launched, how is it actually working? And then we did some quantitative assessment of that, understanding what are the areas where we need to change, what are the areas pain points, and then also when we found these, diving even more into the whys using qualitative assessment, sitting next to the understanding and following the users when they use this tool, and all these three together as a combined solution gave a lot of insights for the clients, where they learned like really key elements about where to improve and how to improve. So if we looked at the key learnings, the lab revealed that when you are in the process of buying this, you need to adjust the room and the size and the shape of the room, and that was quite a struggle for both men and women, and so was moving the cabinets into position. But also stuff like adding windows into your own kitchen was kind of cumbersome. So the whole idea of how to use the tool had a lot of challenges, and that was revealed through the combination of UX, Quant, and Qual. And then we really were able to figure out, like, why is that and how can we then help them. And we saw that there was a general confidence in the concept, but there were a below or average performance when it came to editing the layout, adding the cabinets, and considering the purchase. And through all these insights and where to exactly improve, they were able to focus on the elements that were the most critical. So the whole edit layout phase was improved in order to make the journey more seamlessly and less cumbersome, and providing confidence in the whole process you were doing as a customer yourself, without the expert, which are normally there when you're buying a kitchen or playing around with more expensive stuff like cabinets and so forth. The third pillar is, once you started to innovate and you found your new products and you figured out how to do it, and you learned how the user experience is and so forth, you need to communicate about this as well. So on the following pages, yeah, the communication is about, like, how can you, it's not that different from what you normally know when you're thinking about communication, or what we refer to in Ipsos as creative excellence. But it's about linking functional and emotional attributes. It's about driving emotional connection. It's about personalization. What are the best creatives? How do we talk about all that? That's not so much new, but what is really key now in the new world is linking the touch points and ensuring that your communication works and drives business, not only in brick and mortar, but across your channels. So it's both the brick and mortar, but also the online world, where the communication should drive and have an impact. So this was basically a campaign for a FMCG client that had a back to school campaign, and they were trying to figure out two segments that they were working with. There were the traditionalists, and then there were the basically convenience seekers and more tech savvy. So these two were the target groups they wanted to follow, and they needed to basically learn how they could activate both their in-store channels, but also their e-commerce channels within these two parent segments, and making sure that the campaign tapped into both segments and for basically both channels. So what we did was basically doing a full-blown 360 creative impact approach, which was a very modular approach, where we had some of the core foundations around the campaign impact and brand KPIs and attention, all the stuff that we when you're doing a campaign test. Then we added some creative diagnostics that Ipsos are normally doing as well, like how is it doing, and which areas of the ad works the best. We then had the touch point and the combined with the campaign effectiveness and how it performed on each of the personas and segments, and if it triggered any, let's say, additional word of mouth or even an influencer situation. So that was kind of the solution, which is a step-by-step but interlinked, very, very comprehensive way of measuring all the areas around the normal ad, but also adding in the elements of the touch points and the channels. So they learned from this that the attention the impact of the ad was not under average on TV, but worked quite well online on the digital and social platforms. They also found that there were some synergies between the in-store activation and the paid media, and that's really important because that's the really true added value. There were a strong impact of the in-store and the shelf especially, and then when they looking at the two segments, they found that this worked even better with the convenience seekers, both on digital and social media. So that's around the whole the aspect of the ad, but they also learned about the activation of the channel, and when they're looking at the two segments, there weren't that much of a difference, or if you can see, as you can see in the lower right corner, there are some differences between the two segments, whereas on e-commerce, where it's worked, not surprisingly, a little bit better with the tech-savvy convenience seekers, but the store shelves and the packaging worked slightly better with the traditionalists. But for all and both segments, all of these channels worked. So both the brick and mortar and the e-commerce channel were, the campaign was activating and working for both the channels, and which is really what they aim for this this kind of campaign in an omnichannel strategy. So I think for the last pillar, I'll leave the word to you, Alison, and you can take us through Activate.
Thanks, Anders. So I get to end with Activate, and one of the things we didn't say at the beginning, but we genuinely believe is across all the pillars, we need to begin with a focus on activation. So begin with the end in mind and make sure that everything we do is linked to activation. That's always been true. It's always been a business best practice. We don't always do it. And sometimes we in market research forget that we're not just about delivering good research, but we're all about how do we link, inform, and drive better business strategies. From an omnichannel standpoint, activation, it's more important than it was in store to make sure the insights are linked to the action because it's more granular. We can reach those people directly. We can reach them real time eventually. We can micro segment if we need to and want to. So there's a lot more we can do. The high level questions we talk about in activation are, how do we optimize that overall navigation and customer experience? You know, Anders shared an example of that customer experience, and how do we make sure we do that in a way that can live within the organization? How do we evaluate and maximize the experiences and brand presence? So how do we track it? How do we make sure it's right? How do we do so on our own direct-to-consumer sites, but also retailers and general marketplaces? And how do we measure customer satisfaction? It's easier to do that in a store where you can have your little smiley face buttons at the end, and you can understand what the complaints are and all those kinds, and you have staff in the store to help you. But online, we have to think a little bit differently. So let me take you through a case study on this. And this is particularly relevant to a client who was a bit behind and became all about how do they accelerate digital transformation in the craziness of 2020. So if you think about the client's business situation and what they were trying to do, this is a hypermarket in Latin America. LATAM is one of those regions that has gone from barely being in the e-commerce business to, in the cities, e-commerce starting to dominate in many categories. And this hypermarket in LATAM realized they were behind in e-commerce when the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden they needed to get product to people in a way that leveraged their stores and their competencies, which is very different than the largest e-com players there, in particularly Rappi, which is a third-party app that delivers pretty much everything you want on a scooter. So the real challenging business issue that fell on them in the pandemic. So what were their goals with this work? To think about it as digital transformation. How do we speed it up? Not just change a website, but change everything we do. How do they provide a 360 excellent omnichannel experience across everything? And obviously, the stores are critical here, but the start point could be online, and the start point could be in store, and it could be in the parking lot. And how do they come together? And then, of course, to grow sales. They had a starting point cultural issues. They were thinking about e-commerce. I mentioned the silo earlier. They had a strong e-commerce silo, very small, and a strong retail silo, very big, and they needed to bring it together. They also thought that e-commerce customer experience was a nice to do, that it was something they could do when they had a good year and wanted to play in e-commerce, as opposed to thinking about that as a primary focus. So there were a lot of things they needed to do. So if you think about our approach and what we did with them, the solution that we shared was a combination of different things, very customer experience oriented, very program oriented. So we started with an assessment of what we talk about as their customer experience maturity. How do we align these different organizations? How do we get the e-commerce team a seat at the executive table in a new and different way? And the pandemic was the perfect time to do that. We also did a voice of the customer program for this retailer. We've done it for a long time in their physical stores, and now we needed to create a new way of thinking about measures for their omnichannel side. And the measure we've been focused on, we talk about as ROXY, return on CX investment, and how do we model that so that we have the right KPIs and it's linked to their net promoter scores. So a lot of buzzwords in there, but it really is important to quantify along the way what you're getting out of your omnichannel e-tail experience, and what you're getting out of in-store, and how they come together. We also map the omnichannel journey for them, and you're not supposed to be able to really read the slide, but you can see they're going back and forth between physical and digital vehicles, and that was a really important part of learning for the client. And then we help them create a very strategic roadmap for their omnichannel plan and to improve their voice of the customer in everything that they do. So some of the key insights that we learned: improving the business performance, how do we strengthen the relationship, and it was good for everybody. All really important and things to do. So if you move on to the framework page, the framework page is where we started, right? And I discussed the 4 pillars that we talk about. These are the high-level burning questions, and they pretty much resonate with every company that I've talked to, and by the way, including Ipsos. How do you win throughout the omnichannel experiences? How do we innovate accordingly? How do we effectively and consistently communicate with consumers? How do we optimize engagement and conversion across ecosystems? So those are really high level. There's a lot of sub questions beneath that that we're happy to talk to you about in greater detail within your category and your company. It's really important that you think about this together. We can't just run to activate. We can't just diagnose. We can't just innovate. We can't just communicate. They're all important pillars of what we need to understand going forward. So I want to close, and this is a good time, if you haven't submitted a question, to pop it in the box about the way we think about this and the range of offers that we bring to our clients that we are committed to making sure we reinforce. Understanding the journey across all channels, bringing in the latest trends. You know, there are a lot of things that come up in omnichannel that come up in other parts of the world. You know, better understanding different types of consumers is critical in omnichannel. So things we might do for broader diversity of understanding come front and center. The same thing with sustainability. There are a lot of sustainability issues with omnichannel. And so how do we tie those trends together in a way that helps you build your omnichannel experience? The methodologies are critical. As I mentioned, you can't just use big data. Lots of data things like passive measurement and integrating AI and data science analytics are critical, but so is behavioral science and some of the things that are more human oriented, and how do we bring them together? We focus on tailored learning plans that bring together multiple insight sources. Each company knows different things. So when you start an omnichannel insights program, the first thing you need to do is understand what you know. And that sounds really simple, right? Understand what you know, but it's often hard because it's in different teams. It might be in your digital communications team. It might be in the supply chain team because they know things linked to maybe complaints about boxes not getting there on time. So how do you pull that all together? Making this cross-functional and thinking cutting edge about how do we explore this end-to-end, whether it's locally within Denmark or on a more global scale. And thinking through all kinds of ways to service and how do we bring you the insights you need along the way. So you tie that in with experience in all sectors and especially in tech. We're finding that the learning from our team in China is been incredibly valuable to help us get a jump start on thinking about omnichannel and e-commerce in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do if we weren't really a global footprint and with a huge team in the smartest and most emerging omnichannel markets. So it's a bit of a commercial on the last page. I hope you'll bear with me on that one. And we have a chance now to go to questions. And so, June, do you want to field any questions to us?
Yes, I do. So for Alison, do you think voice commerce is going to be as big as predicted and as fast?
Well, the simple answer is it's already behind what was predicted. So at a high level, it's going to be slower. And I will tell you why. It's because some of the technology doesn't work as well as it should. It depends on your voice. Some people have a perfect experience with voice. I personally have a voice that gets a little scratchy, and I will tell you that none of the voice commerce boxes or Siri on my phone are in love with my voice. So it's just it's a challenge, and as the technology gets better, and it will, and we have a great white paper that if you go to ipsos.com/omnichannel, there's a white paper there on voice commerce that's excellent, or you can email Anders or me and we'll point you to the link, and it's all about the future of voice commerce. So I think it will be slower, but when it hits to the second part of the question, I think it's going to be more powerful. You know, when we have the phone or the device, you know, your voice assistant in the kitchen, I actually happen to have one behind me in my speaker, my stereo speaker that I play when I'm trying to think and work. And the voice assistant in that is pretty magical. So once we get those in every room in our house and they work seamlessly with your local e-commerce operators, all you can say is, you know, I'm out of coffee and I just drank the last cup of what I want, and you tell her to buy you coffee and it's in the box. So I do think it's going to be huge. It's just taking longer than we thought thanks to technology delays.
Thank you very much. Another question is packaging going to play less of an important role since there are no shelves? I don't know who wants to answer that.
Andrew, do you want to take that, or would you like me to jump in?
I can start and then you can fill in the gaps. I think no, I don't think it's going to fulfill less of a role. As we mentioned before, there is different needs to take into account when you do packaging, and if you also take into account this whole sustainability thing, having even a primary and secondary packaging is something that's becoming more crucial to figure out. Like, can you do a primary packaging that's also this? That's also the secondary, so you only need one packaging. That being said, also back to the innovation or innovate pillar, you need to innovate and look into a packaging that's very flexible, that can work online as well as offline, as well as being delivered to the door and delivered in big bulks and in smaller packaging. So I think for me, it's definitely not going to be less important, and I think it's going to be more difficult to make the perfect packaging than it was before.
I agree with that, and I would add one build to that, which is you have to think about packaging and forms of product coming together. So if you're going to ship something, weight matters a lot, right? And let's take a category like laundry detergent, where it's gotten more and more condensed, and the idea was that was more economical because you're shipping less liquid, and it's smaller on the shelf. But as it's become more concentrated, it's also heavier, and so you start to see a shift back toward tablets, right? Or more powder concentrates that are cheaper to ship and fit nicely in a box. Another one is nice round bottles and jars that look pretty on the shelf, break in transit. And so coming back to Tetra Pak type stuff, coming back to cardboard squares that can be packed efficiently in a box is critical, but you need to test that. And you need to test it not just online, as Andrew said, but if you're going to go to one for both, you need to test that pack in store too, because that nice, neat square that fits beautifully in an Amazon box might look terrible on the grocery store shelf. And so you've got to find that right mix between the two, and it could mean two different offers, which is really expensive. And we don't really want to do that, right? We want to come up with the one and test it and understand the right platform for making sure you have the right innovation and the right pack for both channels.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have two questions left. The next one is, how important is the delivery process for e-commerce, and how does the future look like in, for example, cities or in apartments?
Let me start again, and you can fill in the gaps, Alison. I think it's very, very important, as we saw in the early stage of this presentation. It's the top barrier for a lot of people, like that there are delays to the delivery, or they cannot track their delivery. So I think this famous sentence about the last mile is just really going to be crucial. Here in Copenhagen, we have a lot of new companies coming up with new ways of delivering the last mile. So either by bike or walking, or setting up boxes where you can pick up the product. So I think the delivery process is just a crucial thing. And what's different about it is that if you're a brand like Unilever, you cannot just disregard that phase. Now you need to take it into account into your whole strategy, whereas before you could deliver all your product to Walmart and be sure that they would distribute it, or in Denmark, Selling Group or Netto, whatever it is. So I think it's becoming more complex to be a producer of a product and a brand, and I think the whole delivery is no longer with the retailers or the distributors, but also with the brands. Yeah,
and I think that there are also several, I'm going to call them operational improvements coming, and we're starting to see them in many countries. We see them in China, we see them in the US. There tends to be more experimentation right now in those two markets. And I also mentioned Rappi in Latin America. And so the technologies that I'm talking about range from some old school ones, like here in the US, Amazon now has their own trucks. And the Amazon truck, I live on the edge of a small city. The Amazon truck goes by my house 10 times a day. I can get almost anything from Amazon same day now that's a consumable. Obviously, if I want something very specific that's not in my local warehouse, then it takes longer. We have a massive, almost 100% robot run warehouse, 25 minutes east of me, and they're building another one 15 minutes west of me. And our city only has, the metro area is 200,000 people. So think about that. They're servicing us from both sides, and they've got these blue vans with a nice Amazon smile driving around the block all day. They've basically replaced all the delivery services, UPS, FedEx, the ones that used to deliver Amazon, with their own guys. And that's a huge operational change, and it makes things faster. They also are tapping into their grocery stores, and you'll see Walmart doing this as well. And it really, they learned from Alibaba in China that the grocery store now becomes a mini distribution center. And so when you walk in your grocery store, they've replaced a whole quadrant of the store with racks, and people are running around, paid shoppers, shopping in bags for strangers, and then putting them on the racks, and then the truck comes and picks them up and drives them around the neighborhood. And it's back to the future. I mean, this is how like our grandparents' groceries were picked up, right? In a nice little store, they could call over, and you know, the shopkeeper would put things together in a basket for them, and they'd come and pick it up, and they'd pick up whatever else they wanted. Well, now it's happening in an automated way. So that's thing two, is using the store as a mini or micro distribution center, and you can read about it on Alibaba's website or Amazon's on Walmart's website. They're both talking about it like crazy. And then the third thing is this idea of robots and drones and emerging technology that felt like the space age a few years ago that's actually starting to happen. And there are many markets where they're letting these driverless vehicles deliver food up and down the streets. And it's still very tiny, but it is the shape of things to come to make things faster. They're little electric vehicles. They're far better than, you know, a full car. They'll be complemented, I think, by the scooters and bicycles in cities, particularly in Denmark. That's obviously a huge opportunity because you have the roads and the paths and the culture associated with that, but you don't have to put the groceries in your own basket. They're in somebody else's basket, and they drive them home for you. So yeah, lots of different changes happening.
Actually, in Denmark, I believe Rema 1000 is having a service called Vico, where you sign up and you buy the groceries for whomever orders it, right? So it's private persons buying private groceries for someone else, and not even a company delivering the product. So there's a lot of change going on for sure, and yeah, the delivery process is just so important. Yes.
Thank you. There are some more questions coming in. So one from the audience is saying, great reflections over businesses that own physical and online channels. But could you please touch base on the implications around working with Omnichannel for an FMCG brand who does not own physical and online channels? What are the most important priorities for FMCG in order to win with Omnichannel?
So I raise my hand because I get this question all around the world. And if you took our advice as if it was for retailers only, that's absolutely not the case. Because if you're FMCG, the retailers are your distribution channel. And so whether that's an e-tailer, you know, grocery store online, or a grocery store in store, hypermarket, et cetera, they're all going to offer both. And so you need to be prepared for both. That's thing one, is it's happening. And even if you're in a category like fresh food or water that's been slow to get to e-commerce, you're in some ways you're lucky because you have a lot to learn from, right? But you've got to get there. And if you're the brand, if you're the category leader, you should be working with your e-tail partners to help them understand the category and to lead them in a category management, category partnership kind of way online. And if your favorite retailer is not yet doing it right online, they will. They're going to figure it out. And so you need partners, and manufacturers and retailers need to do this together. So you can't think that just because your category isn't there yet, that this isn't happening. It's happening really fast around the world. And yes, maybe in Denmark, you're not on the, what I'll call the bleeding edge of FMCG development in e-commerce yet, but spend some time looking at Alibaba's website, spend some time watching Alibaba TV. It is coming, and it will happen in Northern Europe for sure. And then the other piece that's on top of that is FMCG companies should also look at when they need a direct-to-consumer model, and whether it's for them or to understand the competition. And so these DTC companies are popping up. I'm going to say a lot of acronyms. DTC is popping up in FMCG all over the place. And in many, many countries, there are categories that have great risk. You know, shaving is the perfect one, and all of the different shave clubs in so many different countries, some of which have now been acquired by the big shaving brands, and they're changing the game entirely. So make sure you're watching your competition in the DTC space and carefully evaluating, should you play there too or not? Or maybe there's somebody you should buy locally so that you have DTC plus traditional FMCG models. And I'm sorry for all those acronyms, but that's how the question started.
Thank you. Another one is, can you tell more about the ROCXI, ROCXI measurement used in one of the stories? How is it calculated, and why was it better than other indicators?
Oh, that's a great question. And we were happy to give you to our customer experience mathematicians, if you will, to take you through the details on that. But there's a lot of different ways to collect that data, and it depends whether it's in-store or online or even call centers, right? There's lots of different communication steps that impact the customer experience. So typically it's done by ongoing tracking surveys that can be pulsed in and out. Sometimes they're live and they continue automatically over a period of several years. Sometimes they're done monthly or quarterly. They're often linked to a company's net promoter score effort, if they have that, to understand the role of customer experience on ROCXI. So I'm not going to burden you with me taking you through the math, but we're happy to set up that conversation with our customer experience team, and you can just reach out to Anders and he'll get you to the right team locally.
Yeah.
Great. So right before the bell ring, let us take the last question. It says, if I'm in a category that has not yet shifted heavily to digital shopping, when is the right time to jump into e-commerce? How should I get started?
Anders, do you want me to go, or do you want to?
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So if you think about our framework and the notion of diagnosing, I would strongly encourage everyone to start with doing some real diagnosis. First, internally, to understand what you know, what you don't know, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then with a great insights partner, who we hope would be Ipsos, but you know, whoever your insights partner is, to sit down and really understand, kind of like that beverage example we shared earlier, about what do you know already? What are your shoppers doing? What is that omni-channel shopping journey? We used to, path to purchase, if you will, across channels. What are the role of digital touch points versus physical touch points? Where are they separate? Where do they come together? All of those kinds of things are the absolute right place to start. There are many, and particularly if there are any digital agency folks out here who say, you can just create a site and start doing stuff. And that's true, you can, but if you're an established brand, there's risk in that. If you're a brand new brand, there's not a lot of risk, right? You don't have anything to lose, but you need to make sure if you're an established brand that what you do online strengthens your equity, not dilutes it. And there's a lot of implications of that on your messaging, on what products you put online. You might decide to pull out all your slow movers out of stores and sell them only online. You might do what Procter & Gamble did with Sherman. They actually created an online SKU that's the giant roll of toilet paper, and it was pretty cool until it ran out of stock in COVID. And it's great for places where you don't want to change the roll very often. And so that was a totally different product with a direct-to-consumer model. That who would have thought, right? It's not sold in a grocery store. It's not sold in a hypermarket. It's just sold online. So there's a lot of different things you can do. But if you start with diagnosis, then you'll be headed down a more strategic path. The question of when, there was a lot of silence in shopper research in the heart of the pandemic, and I supported that. Doing deep shopper research when people were really locked down didn't make sense. But now, as we're coming out, and particularly in a country like Denmark that's in pretty good shape, now is the time, because people's behaviors, they figured out where they're jumping back to a store and where they're staying online and what they liked and what they didn't like. And you need to figure that out for your categories too. So I personally think that now is the time. You don't necessarily have to go big. You might start with one e-tailer and a partnership together, or you might start on your own and do an internal diagnosis first to make sure you have your internal house in order before you go outside.
Thank you.
It's now.
There are no more questions. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, June. And thank you very much for all of you guys attending. And we'll hope to see you soon after the summer. We'll have more webinars, and we'll hope to see you there. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.